All right. So we started these first three chapters with a couple of concepts. We talked about the way to build an effective channel management. And the first chapter was the judicious and acceptable use of power in certain situations in order to achieve system level benefits. So this chapter is going to talk about relationships. And there are two very important concepts that are linchpins to relationships, and they're the dual channel or the dual concepts of commitment and trust. And before I go on, I thought I would just show you something. On As You Learn, I have this article here called Morgan Hunt Commitment Trust Theory. You can look at it if you want to. There's not going to be any, well, maybe I'll throw a bonus question in there for the year. But this is really one of those seminal articles in marketing. It's one of those articles that it's kind of a before and after article, that everything changes after this particular article. So this is by two individuals. One of them is known as Robert Morgan. The other is Shelby Hunt. Shelby Hunt is like one of the great gurus of marketing. He has written a marketing theory book, the one that I got my PhD out of. He's written marketing theory books for 60 years now, and he's still going along. He's still a teacher at Texas Tech. I actually have his very first marketing theory book written in 1960. And I just have it because it's just fascinating to realize this man has been writing all these years. So anyway, one of the things that's fascinating about this, and like I say, one of those things that makes you realize the world changes and everything is different. This is kind of like a model that we do in marketing research. I'm not sure whether you've gotten into this yet in your work in marketing, but you know, when we put together concepts like this, and you see something that says opportunistic behavior and trust and uncertainty, you might ask yourself, how do you measure those things? I mean, how do you have actual information that does that? Well, actually what it is there's a series of questions. They could be 5, it could be 30. In psychology, they have something like 130 questions for a given concept, which is ridiculous in marketing circumstances because it creates a concept known as overbilling. In other words, you just say too much, all right? But there could be 8 to 5 questions. Those questions are tested over multiple different types of ideas and concepts. And those questions accurately reflect what opportunistic behavior is. That's how we measure these things, okay? So to read this, what it says is that if I act in an opportunistic way, that is negatively related to a perception of trust. And so that's what this means. If I communicate, if I have a high level of communication, it is positively related to trust. In other words, more communication, more trust. If there are shared values, it not only relates to trust, but it also relates to commitment. And that trust directly relates to commitment. In other words, the more trust I have, the more willing I'm going to have commitment. And then if you notice, the trust is negatively related to uncertainty, which actually is the more trust I have, the less uncertainty I have. And it's interesting that they show functional conflict here, and you're going to be talking about functional conflict next week. And there it is, right there as a concept. It's not a book thing. This is a research thing. And it's a wonderful study that they did. And without getting into the weeds too much, because this stuff is thick, I will say that they tested all of the models and even the ones that in some essence don't make sense. And I could go through and talk about what all of these estimates are, but it would bore you to tears. And it wouldn't, talk about ultimately what the real purpose of this research means. It means that the two most important things are commitment and they are trust, and they all lead to ultimately long-term value. So I just thought I'd want to step this in and show it to you. This is all the appendix. This was in the Journal of Marketing, which is the A journal in marketing, 1994, I believe it is. And it's there for you in the library. For those of you who really want to dig deep into marketing research, it's a good one. Let me also say that on Thursday, we're going to be talking about relationship velocity. And this is something that has to do with trust. And if you notice that name up in the upper left-hand corner, Robert Palmentier, that's the person who wrote your book. So this is something, Gruel, I've met him, he's a brilliant guy. I've met Palmentier too. But this is also something that talks about how relations work and how acceptable they are. So, okay. Now, way many years ago, Walmart and Procter & Gamble had a very interesting relationship. It was rarely good to start out when Walmart was in the very beginning. Procter & Gamble, it was in what we would call a transactional kind of organizational behavior. In other words, they kind of worked together, but if you notice, it was adversarial. Walmart didn't like doing business with P&G. P&G organizations were too complicated and inflexible. And P&G was obsessed by the day-to-day selling, in which success that you got the order out today and failure was that if you didn't, it in essence was nothing that you would consider to be as a good relationship. You know, the business, this is in 1988, they were around 375 million. Now there's a fascinating story to go along with this, is that in 1985, Sam Walton, who was then the head of Walmart, named Procter & Gamble the vendor of the year. And so he was going to call the CEO of Procter & Gamble. So the sales organizations sent Sam's call to the corporate office. And so Sam's hanging on the phone. He gets transferred 5 or 6 times and he never gets to the P&G. This is a P&G, the CEO of Walmart can't call the CEO of P&G. So Sam says, forget it. And then he goes and picks someone else. And so some other company besides P&G got to be vendor of the year. And it became one of those kind of moments that a come to Jesus moment for Procter & Gamble, where they realized that they had to rethink this particular approach, that it really, really wasn't working, because eventually Sam Walton did get in contact with the P&G CEO and said, you were going to be our vendor of the year. And I couldn't get in touch with you. I mean, and if you think about it, it speaks volumes to an organization and their lack of communication. True story, Alan Mulally of Ford. Alan Mulally was from Boeing. He took over Ford in 2005. And he was going to be the Boeing CEO, but he wasn't voted, to the eternal dismay of Boeing, which, you know, Boeing has really bumped along. So Alan Mulally took over as CEO of Ford. And the first thing that he started doing was starting to be able to see who he could call. And he found out that you could not call a manager or a level individual in Ford if you were a lower rank than he was. In other words, there was a system of hierarchy in Ford that would not allow you to communicate across the organization. Alan Mulally threw that away. He made a totally horizontal organization. He redesigned Ford, and Ford from 2005 to 2009 went to become the #1 automobile manufacturer in the world. They're not that now, but they were also the organization that refused to accept any money from the government. And as a matter of fact, tried to buy GM, but wasn't given government approval to do so. He was a brilliant individual. Well, this P&G CEO realized that they've got to act in a different way. They changed the way that they structure with Walmart. They started putting an office of Procter & Gamble in Bentonville. They put an office for Walmart in P&G in Ohio. That original, it was 365 at this point million a year, is now annually 10 billion a year. And they have been able to handle themselves in a very acceptable manner. They have a long-term relationship that I think will stand this for many, many years. And it all comes down to this one time where Sam Walton said, "You never returned my call." So we named someone else. So this is how good can come out of bad. And that leads us into talking about relationships. All right. So the first thing you ask yourself is, why do relationships matter at all? Many reasons. A strong relationship is actually a further barrier to entry. If I have a strong commitment with another organization, then the likelihood that I'm going to move is doubtful. What strong relations do is they create effective channel management. And channel management is all about motivating and incentivizing interdependent, yet independent entities to maximize the common good. It also means that in the true commitment phase, that one organizational other will give up short-term profits and not pursue other opportunities. And that's another thing, it's a higher switching cost. It is more challenging in the omni-channel environment because you have to synergize channel activities. And the conflicting interests across the channels. In other words, because of the need for a seamless experience, there's a much higher bar or a greater demand that everybody's playing on the same field. So strong channel relationships are a willingness to engage in give and take interactions. They reflect the objectives of good partnerships. And give and take is one of those linchpins. Commitment exists when one organization wants the relationship to continue. Now, let's talk about what are the motivations for strong channel relationships. And let's first start talking about the upstream. Now, the truth is that most manufacturers or suppliers come with a lack of appreciation of their downstream partners. And that there's that belief that I can do it in-house and I can do it by myself and I don't need any other help. And they fail to appreciate the value that your lower channel members provide. And they overestimate their own ability. Quite simply because they think they're smart in manufacturing, they think they're smart in everything or smart in product. But just because you're an excellent accountant doesn't mean you're an excellent marketer. When an upstream member exists, you come in awareness that the downstream members bring something that you can't bring, that they have an offer that you don't. And when you have an appreciation for that, it means that it comes beyond just merely selling your products. It motivates you to sell better in the current markets. It motivates you or the downstream partner to be willing to invest in new markets. And it also means your downstream member are willing to bring new products into existing markets. I kind of go always in my discussion, I talk about steel tool quite a bit, because Steel Tools is one of the best dealer networks that you can possibly imagine. So I think there are like 22,000 total dealerships in the United States that are independent. 15 to 16,000 of those sell steel tools. And of those, 9,000 of those independent distributors are sole steel dealerships. That's an enormous number. And why would you do that? And the answer is quite simply is that steel has a great appreciation for their downstream partners, and they show it. Downstream partners have no problem trying out new products, steel tools on their shelves. They don't necessarily move into new markets because there are 22,000 independent hardware stores in the United States, so they're everywhere. But a steel tool dealership, the fact that they are exclusive unto steel only just gives you an idea how willing they are to throw themselves into a given situation. If the manufacturers are better at coordinating their efforts with distributors, distributors have a greater understanding of the end users, and they help the manufacturers reach the end users better. If it is a bad relationship, distributors are wary of manufacturers, and they may withhold information that could be valuable to the manufacturers. Because if it's not a balanced relationship, the manufacturer may use that against them. They're more willing to share the information if they depend on them. Makes sense. If they depend on if the manufacturers depend on them. So those are the upstream reasons. What are the downstream reasons? If I'm a dealer, a downstream dealer in an uncertain economy, it is a comfort to know that I have a stable and assured supply of desired products. And Walmart really, really wanted Procter & Gamble a better relationship, because if there's one thing that Procter & Gamble wins on, it's on their fast-moving consumer goods, the FMCGs, the stuff that goes through a supermarket. Procter & Gamble has got their nose to the grindstone. They know what's going on. They're often called the bullies. They're just that good at fast-moving consumer goods. And so Walmart wants that relationship. The next is, if I'm a downstream partner, is consolidation. In 2004, 2006, somewhere in that area, Compaq computers and Hewlett-Packard computers merged. And in a situation like that, the number of manufacturers that a distributor could count on went down significantly, because they were both fairly large organizations. And anyone knows that when two organizations merge, if they have duplicate structures, one of them has to go. If there's a strong, stable relationship that the downstream partner has cultivated, then there's a greater likelihood that the downstream partner is going to survive. If I am a distributor, if I am a wholesaler or a retailer, I want a strong relationship with the manufacturers or the suppliers, the upstream ones, because that makes me different. What that means is the added services that I can bring beyond just merely selling the product. Preventive maintenance, product training, assistance with use of that particular product is an example. When we talk about wholesaling, I'm going to talk about a company called Moody Price. I've talked about them a couple of times. And Moody Price is an oil field distributor. And Moody Price has, I believe, a half dozen makers of stainless steel fittings. And why do you need more than one type of stainless steel fitting? Is because you have more than one standard. Not only that, but they are so experienced in what they do that retailers and end users seek them out. And so that is an example of how a distributor seeks out good suppliers to make themselves different. And what's the long in the long run? What are you trying to do? You're trying to obtain an enduring competitive advantage that leads to a profit, and that's what both sides are trying to do. One more thing on that barrier of entry. Just remember that when we talk about place, one of the powers of place is that it is difficult to replicate. And when you have a unique commitment of a relationship, that relationship is very difficult to be repeated. So this is kind of a fairly nice cheat sheet to help you to talk about the motivations and the reasons to maintain strong relationships if you're talking about upstream or if you're talking about downstream. The partnership makes it much easier to take risk. And I think if you're going to put one thing in there and say, it's that there's a willingness to accept risk in a form that you wouldn't have ordinarily. All right. So we're moving on. And talking about why we have a commitment. We have a commitment basically because we want to be able to have the expectation that the partners will be doing business for a long time. The truth is that most channel members know that they can be replaced if performance falls. And in the United States, the legal barriers to termination are quite low. Now, continuity gets better or it increases. Remember, I showed you that the model. Continuity expectations increase when you have these things: trust, two-way communication. When you have a reputation for fair dealing, which we will talk about in terms of procedural justice and distributive justice. A long-standing, stable relationship. When power is balanced and not asymmetric. And finally, when both sides are committed to the future success of each other. This is both a thinking and a doing thing. And so you have some things in here which are attitudinal, and you have also things in here which are done by action. A committed party, usually they will be saying these kind of things. We're willing to grow the relationship. We'll defend them when others criticize them. We're patient with their mistakes. We're willing to make long-term investments and then wait for the payoff to come. We have a strong sense of loyalty. Basically, what these are statements that could be made by both sides in a cordial relationship. And really, the only way that happens, commitment happens when you invest in each other. And we're going to come up here and talk about how you actually make those investments. Now, strong commitment or strong relationships require a strong commitment. Asymmetric commitment is rare. In other words, when one organization doesn't commit as strongly as the other. Now, it can happen, but it happens in such power asymmetry situations that are so overwhelming that it's simply impossible for one side to compare more or to care more than another. The Coke Corporation cannot have the same relationship with every small mom and pop store in every city under 500. It's simply impossible. It's those situations where the power differences are so ridiculously high that no, you can't. But in normal, well-balanced relationships, asymmetric commitment is very rare. They can say that they're partners, but sometimes they don't believe in it. And so Coke might say, well, yeah, well, we care about, Mel's Diner in Cut Off, Louisiana. But the truth is that's really just a statement. And so usually mutual commitments are where there's some shared interest in symmetric commitment. And so what are the strategies for building this? So to build a commitment, you have to first say to yourself, have I ever had conflict with this particular supplier? And is the supplier going to take any kind of actions to tie itself with me? Well, there's two things that a supplier can do. We're talking about the top of the tree, manufacturer. The first is that the supplier can be selective, that they can promise you some degree of protection from competitors that are seeking the same brands. This can be sometimes very difficult, especially if the manufacturer or the supplier is brand new and they're just trying to sell as many as they possibly can. But if it is a long-term, committed, relatively strong organization, then they're going to want to put in these selected or specialized investments. The example I've used before is LG Electronics. When they were looking for dealerships to distribute in the United States their high definition televisions, and they settled on one, which was Walmart, and that was being selected. And that competitor was very protective, and it was a very good relationship. The second is that the supplier might seek to build assets that are dedicated to your relationship that cannot be redeployed in connection with another distributor. So an example of this would be, steel tools. If you build on another section of your store, even if you're only committing half of that growth area to steel, they'll pay 30% of whatever it costs to make that. So if you're putting on a $50,000 extension, Steel Tools will write a check for $15,000. So that's an idea of the commitment that they have. Just remember this commitment, this symmetric commitment, is also known as reciprocity. You do something for me, I do something for you. So some of the things that a supplier can do, the supplier can have personnel and facilities dedicated to just one distributor. They can have one individual take care of that one group. Procter & Gamble goes even further than that. Procter & Gamble's has in Bentonville, Arkansas, an office with, I believe, 100 P&G individuals working there. And Walmart has their own office in the headquarters of P&G. I think it's in Ohio. A supplier spends time learning about your organization, how you do things, your strength, your weaknesses, so that they can better help you participate selling their stuff. The supplier might create compatible reporting systems geared to the particularities of the way we do things. You might also find that they'll make investments that help identify your business and our business in the minds of the consumer. And then the real thing that creates commitment is not just doing specialized investments, but doing generalized training. And so what the generalized training means is that they can actually train you to lead you. And that's a real commitment. And so you have specialized investments, and then you have generalized investments. What investments that are willing to take a risk. Looking on the other side of the relationship, what do distributors do? They can dedicate individuals in their organizations that focus just on that line of product. Me and a guy by the name of Tim Schooler, I remember Tim, we spent so much time reading up on Mitsubishis, it was sick. But we were the kind of the guys that were in the organization to invest just on that. You can invest the individuals that are selling those products that serve that particular line so they can know more. Distributors want to know about you as a manufacturer or as a supplier and build relationships with you. Training customers in the use of your line is not as surprising as it might seem. So anybody ever go in a steel distributorship? You have. Ever bought anything there? Okay. Now think about buying a chainsaw. What would you want to know? Yeah, that's the first thing. What would be the next thing? If you've never used a chainsaw before.
Probably a warranty or some safety.
Yeah, that's the first thing I want to start. I want to know how to hold the thing so it doesn't bite me. All right. That's the first thing I want to know. I want to know where to oil it. I want to know where to gas it. I want to know where to hold it to start it. I want to know how to shut it off safely. And those are all of the things that a distributor or steel distributor will do that you won't necessarily find at a Lowe's home improvement center, okay, which are different than a hardware store. So it actually, downstream member does more downstream effort, okay? And so you train your customers and your customers become mavens for those particular items. You'll ally your name to that corporation in the customer's mind. And so as far as the customers are concerned, you are steel. And so you attempt to invest in a reporting system that's compatible with yours. And that you locate your facilities near them and far away from competitors. And so these are the ways that we stretch out, we get close to our customers, close to our suppliers, and we start to build this trust. We break walls down. We're willing to take a risk. And in everything, there's risk. A distributor will enter the relationship if they believe the payoff will justify the cost. If I'm going to build $50,000, even if they're going to take care of 15, I got to know that this is going to work. And so I start dedicating things to the supplier, like having my personnel. We do joint marketing together. So I call the advertising department with Steel, and I do approved advertisements that they have, their approved copy, and Steel will pay 90% of that advertising bill for me. I will check with Steel's marketing efforts, whatever going on seasonally. And I'm willing for the suppliers to see what weaknesses I have, and those come up in two-way communications. And how we can give some advice to the supplier that can help enhance commitment. So you see, all of these things lead to a willingness to trust someone, and trust has to be given and trust has to be earned. And these are the ways that you earn trust. So for the supplier, of course, it's the trust and verify. They have to make sure that the channel members have the ability and the motivation. If the distributor has that communication, then it's willing to tell the supplier whether or not it can do what it says it can. And the two-way communication also with the distributor helps, because the distributor is willing for them to give that manufacturer a look further down the road or over the wall to get an idea to see what the market looks like and whether or not that distributor is going to effectively serve a market, because there is no success in a distributor being incapable of selling something for a supplier. It's a bad rep all around. Now, having said that, after all of that, you can have a close, committed relationship without creating a successful channel. You can have a committed relationship, closely coordinated, working together, but it doesn't guarantee success, because one of the reasons, quite simply, is just look where we are now, 2022. And they've got, 270 container ships are off Los Angeles right now, and they're starting to park some of them by San Diego. I mean, that's an example. There ain't enough trucks, folks. It's as simple as that. They need to all go to Savannah, where they're unloading 4 million containers every year. Can you believe that? I'm going to do this thing on Ever Given, and the Ever Given has 10,000 containers on a single ship. Okay, just to give you an idea how crazy it is. And they can 4 million containers. I calculated it out. It comes down to some crazy number, like 3,000 containers could be moved in an hour. It just boggles the mind. It's amazing. Anyway, I'm going on. I'm just saying that even though having a committed relationship is a key to success, it's not a guarantee to success, okay? All right, we have played out for today. We've talked about commitment. On Thursday, we're going to do the flip side of the commitment trust theory, and we're going to talk about trust. Truthfully, if I were going to do this, I would talk about trust first, but I didn't write the book, okay? So we'll do it the way the book says. I'll see y'all Thursday. See you.